When I look back now, it still feels unreal, like a dream I can't wake up from. That day started just like any other. I remember the smell of coffee drifting through the kitchen, the sound of the clock ticking above the sink, and the quiet hum of morning light filling my home. Nothing felt unusual. Nothing warned me that by noon, my whole life would break apart. I was just a mother, a wife, moving through her day, thinking about what to cook for dinner and what colored dress I should wear for my son's engagement party next weekend. Life was simple, steady. I had no idea I was standing on the edge of a storm. My son, Daniel, had been engaged for almost 6 months. His fiancée, Emily, was the kind of girl every mother hopes her son will find. She was gentle, respectful, soft-spoken. She called me Mom long before the engagement was even official. And maybe that's what hurt the most, because I trusted her like my own daughter. That morning, Daniel had left early for work. He'd been working long hours to save for their wedding, and Emily had offered to stop by to help me organize some of the decorations. I remember smiling when she texted, "I'll come by around 11, Mom." So I waited. I made tea, set out some cookies, and started going through the old photo albums, thinking how lucky I was that my son had found such a kind-hearted girl. My husband, Richard, had been quiet lately. I thought it was just the stress of work. He'd been staying late at the office more often, sometimes coming home after midnight. When I asked, he'd sigh and say, "Just another project deadline, honey." And I believed him, because after 30 years of marriage, trust becomes automatic. You stop questioning. You stop doubting. You just trust. But that morning, something felt off. When I called Richard around 10 to ask if he wanted lunch later, he didn't pick up. I didn't think much of it until I noticed his car in the driveway. I frowned. Maybe he came home early? I remember wiping my hands on a towel, walking down the hallway, and hearing the faint sound of laughter, soft, familiar laughter, coming from the living room. I thought maybe Daniel had come home, but when I turned the corner, my heart stopped. I froze. There they were, Emily and Richard. It took me a few seconds to understand what I was seeing. She was sitting close beside him, her hand on his chest, both of them, whispering, faces too close, far too close, for what should have been an innocent conversation. The tray in my hand slipped. The sound of the plate hitting the floor made them both jump. Emily turned first. Her face went pale, her mouth opening as if to say something, but no words came out. Richard's eyes widened. He stood up quickly, fumbling for an explanation that didn't exist. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just stood there, frozen in silence, the air around me heavy enough to crush my chest. "Mom?" Emily started, her voice trembling. But I couldn't look at her. I couldn't even look at him. In that moment, I felt like the floor beneath me had disappeared. The woman I'd welcomed into my home, the girl I'd trusted with my son's heart, and the man I'd shared a lifetime with, had betrayed me in the same breath. Richard took a step forward. "It's not what it looks like," he said, voice shaking. That line, I had heard it in movies, but never thought it would be said to me, by my husband. I remember whispering, "Then what is it, Richard?" He couldn't answer. Emily's eyes filled with tears. She said, "Please let me explain." "Explain what?" That my marriage was a lie? That my son's fiance had been sneaking around with his own father? I felt dizzy. The world around me blurred and my body moved on its own. I walked to the door, opened it, and said quietly, "Both of you, leave." They hesitated. "Please," I repeated, voice calm but breaking, "leave." They did, slowly, shamefully. The door clicked shut behind them, and the silence that followed was unbearable. I stood there for a long time, staring at the doorknob, hearing nothing but the sound of my own breathing. When you've built your entire life around people, your husband, your child, your home, and suddenly the foundation cracks, it's not loud. It's quiet, terrifyingly quiet. That day, I sat on the couch holding the same photo album I'd opened hours earlier. I looked at pictures of Richard and I in our 20s, smiling at the beach, of Daniel as a baby with both of us laughing, of Emily standing beside him at last year's Thanksgiving dinner. And I couldn't stop asking myself, when did it all start? Was it one careless conversation that went too far? A lonely night? Or had it been happening right under my nose all along? I'll never know. That afternoon, I didn't call Daniel. I couldn't. How do you tell your son that the woman he's going to marry, the woman he loves, has been with his father? How do you destroy your own child's happiness with a single sentence? So I stayed silent. I washed the teacups that nobody drank from. I folded the towel that still smelled of soap. And I watched the sunlight fade from the curtains. And when night came, I sat alone in the dark, listening to the clock tick, wondering how many seconds it takes for a heart to truly break. People think heartbreak comes with tears and screams, but no. Real heartbreak is stillness. It's when your body feels too heavy to move, and your soul feels too hollow to cry. When Richard came home that night, I didn't ask where he'd been. He didn't offer an explanation either. We just sat at the dinner table, two strangers who used to share a life. He looked older that night. I could see the guilt in the lines around his eyes, but I didn't speak. I couldn't. Emily didn't show up again after that day. No calls, no messages. But the silence between us all spoke louder than words ever could. And though I didn't know it then, that was only the beginning of the end. The truth wouldn't stay buried forever. Because secrets like that, they always find their way to light.
Before everything fell apart, my life looked ordinary, in the best way possible. I used to think that's what happiness was. Quiet mornings, familiar faces, and a home that smelled like coffee and fresh laundry. Nothing grand, nothing special, just peace. Our house wasn't fancy, but it was filled with memories. The wallpaper in the hallway still had faint pencil marks from when Daniel was a little boy. I'd measure his height every birthday. In the kitchen, the cabinet door by the stove had a small crack in it from the time he tried to reach for the cookie jar and slipped. I never fixed it. Somehow, those little imperfections made the house feel alive, like it remembered us. Richard and I met when we were both in college. He wasn't the most charming man, but he was steady, dependable. He used to walk me home after class, even when it was out of his way. I remember once asking him why, and he said, "Because you look like the kind of woman worth coming home to." I never forgot that line. We married a year after graduation, when neither of us had much, just dreams and faith. I worked part-time at a local library. He started at a construction company. We saved, we built. And slowly, we made a life. When Daniel was born, everything changed. He became the center of my world. I still remember holding him for the first time. Tiny fingers, pink cheeks, eyes that wouldn't open all the way. I whispered to him, "You're my whole heart." And he really was. Richard was a proud father. He'd come home from work covered in dust and paint, but the first thing he'd do was lift Daniel up and kiss his forehead. "My little man," he used to say. Sometimes I'd watch them from the doorway, father and son, laughing together, and I'd feel so lucky it almost scared me. We didn't have much, but we had love. We made family out of simplicity. Friday movie nights with popcorn, summer picnics by the lake, Christmas mornings when Daniel would wake us up before sunrise because he couldn't wait to open his presents. When Daniel grew older, I tried to give him space, but he never pulled too far away. He was always kind, always respectful. He'd tell me everything: school troubles, friends, even the girls he liked. And when he finally brought Emily home, I remember thinking, this one feels different. She had a smile that could soften anyone. Quiet, polite, with a warmth that reminded me of myself when I was young. She worked as a nurse's assistant, always putting others before herself. I liked that about her immediately. The first time she came over for dinner, she insisted on helping in the kitchen. "Please, Mom," she said with that shy smile. "Let me wash the dishes." I remember laughing. "You don't have to call me that yet." But she said softly, "I want to. You make me feel like home." From that day on, she was part of the family. She'd come over on Sundays to bake pies or sit with me in the garden while Richard and Daniel fixed things around the house. Sometimes I'd catch Richard joking with her, light-hearted things, and it made me happy to see everyone getting along so well. I never imagined it could turn into something else. Those were golden years, though I didn't know it then. Looking back, I can still see the sunlight spilling through the kitchen window, Daniel's laughter echoing from the backyard, Emily humming softly as she helped me cook. Everything felt complete. There's a photo I keep in an old album, taken at the lake a couple of summers before the engagement. We'd gone there for a family picnic. In the picture, Daniel is sitting beside Emily, both smiling at the camera, Richard standing behind them with his arm around me. It's such an ordinary photo, but now, when I look at it, I can't help but wonder if, even then, something unseen had already begun, a shadow just out of frame. But in those days, life was simple. I trusted the people I loved without question. I remember one night, it was raining hard, thunder shaking the windows, and Emily called, her voice trembling. Her apartment had lost power. Without thinking, I told her, "Come stay here." She did. She slept in the guest room that night, and I remember checking on her before bed. She looked so peaceful, curled under the blanket like a daughter I never had. Richard had been in the living room that evening reading the paper. He said, "She's a good girl," when I walked by. I smiled and said, "She really is." And for a long time, I believed that. The months went by and Daniel proposed to her on a quiet evening at our house. He decorated the backyard with fairy lights and played her favorite song on his phone. When she said yes, I cried more than she did. I hugged her so tight and whispered, "Welcome to the family, sweetheart." She hugged me back, whispering, "Thank you for loving me like a mother." That night, as everyone celebrated, I saw Richard watching us. There was pride in his eyes, or maybe something else I didn't notice then. After the engagement, Wedding preparations filled every weekend. Emily often stopped by when Daniel was busy. She said she enjoyed spending time with me, and honestly, I enjoyed it too. We'd sit together going through decoration catalogs, drinking tea, talking about colors and flowers. She'd ask about my early days with Richard, how we made a marriage last so long. I'd tell her stories, funny ones, a little advice here and there, never realizing those same words would later haunt me. One afternoon, while Daniel was out, Richard came home early. Emily and I were baking, flour everywhere, laughter filling the room. Richard walked in, smiled, and said, "Looks like fun in here." Emily laughed and said, "Your wife's teaching me her secrets." He teased, "Careful, she might teach you too well." It was such an innocent moment, or so I thought. Looking back, maybe there were small signs I ignored. A glance too long, a tone too soft, laughter that lingered just a second more. But love blinds you. Not just romantic love, but family love too. You don't want to see cracks in the people you've built your life around. That summer, Daniel got busier with work. He often came home late, exhausted, leaving Emily free to visit during the day. Sometimes she'd stay to wait for him, and I didn't mind. I loved her company. I thought it was sweet how close she was becoming with us. Richard had started working from home more often then. He'd chat with her, help her carry boxes, offer her tea when I was busy. I never thought twice about it. Why would I? If I could go back to those days, I think I'd pay more attention. Not because I could have stopped what happened. Maybe I couldn't. But because I would have wanted to see them clearly, as they really were, not as I wished them to be. Still, I can't bring myself to hate those memories, because even though they're painted over now with pain and betrayal, they were real once. The laughter, the warmth, the love. There's a strange kind of ache that comes with remembering good times after your heart's been broken. You start to wonder, was it ever truly real? Or was it all just a story you told yourself to feel safe? For me, I think it was real. I think people can love you and still hurt you, not because they plan to, but because they're flawed and weak in moments they should have been strong. And that's what makes it all so tragic. Because before everything fell apart, I had a good life, a peaceful life, a family I believed in. If you told me then that one day I'd be sitting alone telling this story, I would have smiled and said, "Not us. We're different." But nobody's different. Pain finds us all. Sometimes where we least expect it.
Looking back now, I realized the signs were always there. They weren't loud or obvious. They were small, almost invisible, like hairline cracks in a window. The kind you don't notice until sunlight hits them just right. It started with little things. Richard became quieter at the dinner table. He used to talk about work, about plans for the weekend, about the neighbor's dog that barked too much. But suddenly, he didn't have much to say. His answers grew shorter. His eyes drifted to his phone more often than to my face. I thought maybe he was just tired. After all, 30 years of marriage teaches you that silence doesn't always mean distance. Sometimes it's just life settling into its rhythm. But then
Emily began visiting less. When she did come, she seemed distracted, not the cheerful girl who used to fill my kitchen with laughter. She'd smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. I remember asking her once, "Everything all right, sweetheart?" And she said, "Just tired, Mom. Long week at work." I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Yet, small moments began to add up. One afternoon, I was folding laundry in our bedroom when Richard's phone buzzed on the nightstand. It wasn't unusual. His phone was always ringing with work calls. But that day, the sound made me pause. I don't know why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way he'd been guarding that phone lately, carrying it everywhere like it held a secret. The message preview flashed for half a second, just enough for me to read. "Can we talk? I can't keep doing this." No name, just that. I stood there, frozen. My first thought wasn't even suspicion, it was concern. I thought, maybe it's a client having a hard time. That's the kind of woman I was, always giving the benefit of the doubt. When I asked him later that night, casually, who had texted, he smiled faintly and said, "Just work stuff." Something in his tone sounded rehearsed. Still, I let it go. A few days later, Emily came over. She was wearing a new perfume, something stronger, more mature. I remember teasing her, trying out something new for the wedding. She laughed, but her cheeks flushed red. "Oh, it was a gift," she said quickly. "A gift?" I asked, curious. She nodded. "From a friend." At that time, I didn't think much of it. Only later did I remember how her eyes flickered toward the hallway, the direction of Richard's office, before she looked back at me. Weeks passed. Daniel was busier than ever, and Emily often said she'd stop by to pick up wedding things when he couldn't. I liked her company too much to say no. But one afternoon, she arrived while Richard was home. I was upstairs cleaning, and I heard them talking in the living room. At first, it sounded normal, laughter, light conversation, but then their voices dropped, low and serious. I couldn't make out the words, but something in the tone made my stomach twist. It wasn't what they said, it was how they said it. Careful, quiet, like people hiding something fragile. When I walked downstairs, the room went silent. Both looked startled, like children caught doing something wrong. Emily smiled quickly, too quickly. "Oh, hi, Mom. We were just talking about the guest list." "The guest list?" I asked, wiping my hands on a towel. "Yes," she said. "I was asking your opinion about seating arrangements." Richard nodded, eyes not meeting mine. It was such a small, ordinary moment, and yet it left a weight in my chest that wouldn't lift. That night, I couldn't sleep. I told myself I was being silly, that love can make people paranoid when they feel left out. But the unease stayed. A few days later, I noticed another small thing. The way Richard shaved before leaving for work on Saturdays. He'd never cared much about that before. But suddenly, he was paying attention to how he looked. Fresh shirts, cologne, even combing his hair differently. I joked, "Trying to impress your boss?" He laughed it off, "Just trying not to look like an old man." But there was something about the way he said it that felt wrong. a lightness that didn't reach his eyes. Emily's behavior mirrored his. She grew distant. When we talked, she'd lose focus mid-sentence. Once I asked her if she and Daniel were okay, and she said, "Of course, why wouldn't we be?" But her voice trembled just enough to leave a question hanging in the air. The small cracks widened slowly. One afternoon, Daniel stopped by after work. I made his favorite pie, and he sat at the kitchen table eating like a boy again. "Emily's been quiet lately," he said suddenly. "You noticed?" I hesitated. "Maybe just stressed about the wedding." He nodded. "Yeah, maybe." Then he smiled weakly. "You know how women get when they have too much to plan." I smiled back, pretending his words didn't sting a little. I wanted to tell him what I'd been feeling, the strange heaviness between his father and Emily, but I couldn't. How do you even say something like that without proof? So I said nothing. Silence became my shield. But silence can be dangerous. It gives secrets room to grow. A few weeks later, Emily called, and she said she was coming over to drop off fabric samples. I told her I'd be home, but a last-minute errand came up and I left for about an hour. When I came back, her car was gone, and so was Richard's. At the time, I brushed it off. Coincidence, I told myself. But deep down, a small voice whispered, "Are you sure?" That night, Richard came home late. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, and there was a faint scent of that same floral perfume, the one that Emily had worn weeks earlier. It could have been my imagination. It could have been anything, but it wasn't nothing. I remember sitting in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling something inside me shifting. Doubt, sadness, fear, all tangled together. I wanted to believe in him. I wanted to believe in her, but belief has limits. One evening, as I folded laundry, Emily called. She sounded nervous. "Mom, is Daniel home?" "No," I said. "He's working late." "Oh," she said quietly. "Then, never mind. I just wanted to ask about the centerpieces." It was such a strange call, hesitant, uncertain. And then she added softly, "You've always been so kind to me. I hope you know that." I remember pausing, confused. "Of course, sweetheart. Is something wrong?" "No," she whispered. "Nothing's wrong." And then she hung up. After that, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was trying to tell me something, or maybe apologize for something she hadn't confessed yet. The next few days felt heavier. Even the air in the house felt different. Richard avoided my eyes more often. He'd kiss my forehead in passing, say, "I'll be late," and leave before sunrise. Sometimes he wouldn't come home until after midnight. I'd sit on the couch, the TV playing quietly in the background, waiting for his car lights to appear through the window. When they finally did, I'd pretend to be asleep. I didn't want to hear excuses. I didn't want lies. One morning, I found his tie tucked into the back seat of the car, smelling faintly of that same floral perfume. I sat there in the driveway, holding it in my lap, the sun barely rising, and for the first time, I let the tears fall. Still, I said nothing.
Because silence felt safer than the truth. A few days later, Daniel told me he might be getting a promotion. I smiled, hugged him, and told him how proud I was.
But part of me ached, knowing that while he was planning his future, the people he trusted most were building lies behind his back. That's when I realized something painful. Sometimes the hardest part of love isn't betrayal, it's pretending not to see it. I began avoiding both of them. When Emily visited, I found reasons to stay busy: laundry, errands, gardening. When Richard was home, I'd go to bed early. I moved through the days like a ghost in my own house. But secrets don't stay hidden forever. I didn't know when or how, but I could feel it, like thunder in the distance, coming closer with every heartbeat. And though part of me wanted to run from it, another part of me, the quiet, strong part, whispered that maybe it was time. Time for the truth. Time to face what I already knew deep down. Because once cracks begin to spread, there's no stopping them. Eventually, the whole thing shatters. I still remember that afternoon as if time itself slowed down to watch me. The sun was gentle, spilling soft light through the lace curtains in our living room. I was folding laundry, simple, quiet work that usually calmed me. But that day my hands felt heavy. Something inside me kept stirring, like a small warning I couldn't name. My son, Daniel, was supposed to meet his fiancée, Lily, at the cafe near our house. My husband, Mark, had said he would be out for errands. It was an ordinary plan, nothing strange, yet an uneasy feeling kept tugging at my chest. For weeks, I had noticed little things: Mark taking calls in the other room, Lily avoiding my eyes, Daniel distracted. But I kept brushing it aside. Families have moods, I told myself. Everyone gets busy before a wedding. I tried to silence that voice inside me with chores. The washing machine hummed, the clock ticked steadily. But the silence between those sounds was unbearable. Finally, I decided to step outside. Maybe a short walk would clear my mind. The air was warm, the scent of jasmine floating through the neighborhood. I walked without direction, only to find myself near the old cafe Daniel loved, the one where Lily and he had first met. My feet slowed as I approached the corner. Something about the quiet felt off. From across the street, through the wide glass window, I saw two people sitting close together. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The man's back was familiar: broad shoulders, the same navy jacket Mark always wore. The woman's hair glowed auburn under the sunlight, just like Lily's. I blinked. My breath caught. They were leaning toward each other, not like friends, not like family. Their hands were clasped on the table, fingers intertwined, heads bowed close enough for whispers. The world around me blurred. Cars passed, people walked, but I heard nothing. I wanted to turn away, to convince myself it was a misunderstanding, but my body wouldn't move. Every inch of me froze, except my heart, which pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Then Lily laughed softly, touching Mark's hand with that gentle, intimate care I'd seen her show Daniel so many times. I stumbled back, my hand pressed to my mouth. The scene shattered something deep inside me. It couldn't be true. Not him. Not her. Not both. I walked home in a daze, clutching my handbag as if it could hold me together. Inside the house, everything looked exactly the same. The framed family photos, the flowers on the table, but none of it felt real anymore. When the front door opened later that day,
Mark came in humming. He kissed my cheek as usual, but I felt his warmth like fire against ice. "Did you get everything you needed?" I asked, my voice too calm. He nodded, avoiding my eyes. "Yes, just a long day running around." Lies slide easily when they're practiced. I learned that too late. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed beside him, listening to his steady breathing, staring at the ceiling. My mind replayed every smile, every dinner, every conversation with Lily. I had trusted her completely. She had called me mom more than once. I thought she truly meant it. The next morning, I watched as Mark left for work. His jacket smelled faintly of Lily's perfume. Floral, sharp, unforgettable. My stomach turned. I needed to be sure. 2 days later, I told Daniel I wanted to visit Lily's apartment to drop off some fabric swatches for her wedding dress. He smiled, grateful, completely unaware. "She'll love that, Mom," he said. When I arrived, I hesitated at her door. My hand hovered over the bell, but before I could press it, I heard laughter inside. Mark's laughter. My whole body went cold. The door wasn't fully closed. It was ajar, just a few inches. Through that gap, I saw my husband sitting on her couch. Lily was beside him, her hand on his knee, tears in her eyes. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered. "I know," he said quietly. "After the wedding, we'll figure something out." After the wedding. The words sliced through me. I backed away, my heartbeat echoing in my ears, then stumbled down the hall before they could notice me. My legs shook so badly I had to hold the wall to stay upright. Outside, the sky looked different. Too bright, too cruel. I walked aimlessly for hours. Every step felt like walking through water, heavy and slow. How could love turn into this? How could two people I trusted most betray not only me, but Daniel too? By the time I reached home, the sun was setting. My reflection in the hallway mirror startled me. I looked older, smaller, as if part of me had vanished. Mark came home late again. I didn't ask where he'd been. I just served dinner, quietly, the way I always did. He talked about work, about how busy the week had been. I nodded, pretending to listen. Inside, I was breaking piece by piece. That night, after he fell asleep, I went to the living room and sat alone in the dark. The silence pressed around me. My wedding photo hung on the wall. A younger version of us smiling, full of hope. I stared at it until my vision blurred. For years I had built this home, cared for this family, loved without holding back. And now, everything I believed in was trembling, on the edge of collapse. I thought of Daniel, his gentle heart, his excitement for the future. The truth would destroy him. He idolized his father and adored Lily. How could I take that away from him? Tears slid down my face, one after another. I didn't sob or scream. I just sat there quietly, letting the pain wash over me. By morning, I had made a decision. I would not tell anyone. Not yet. I would carry the truth alone, at least until I found the strength to face what came next. The days after that moment blurred together like a long gray winter. I moved through the house as if I were performing a role in a play I no longer believed in. Breakfast, laundry, dinner, small talk. Everything looked the same from the outside, but nothing felt the same inside me. Mark still smiled at me, still asked about my day, but I could no longer meet his eyes for long. Each time he looked at me, I wondered if he could see it, the knowledge hiding behind my calm face. Sometimes I caught myself staring at his hands, remembering how they had rested on Lily's knee, and I had to look away quickly before he noticed the tremor in mine. Lily continued visiting the house. She brought cake, helped me choose table decorations, and spoke about honeymoon plans with a brightness that felt cruel in its innocence. I answered her gently, nodding, pretending I didn't know. She called me Mom, her voice soft, careful, as if nothing in the world was wrong. Each time she said it, my heart broke a little more. At night, I lay awake listening to the sound of the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the clock ticking on the wall. Sleep never came easily anymore. I kept replaying every small sign I had ignored, the lingering glances, the sudden silences, the way Lily once pulled her hand away too quickly when Mark passed by. How had I missed it all? Maybe I had simply refused to see it. Daniel was radiant, talking about their future. He was designing a small studio for Lily, saving every dollar he could.
He even asked me one evening, "Mom, isn't Dad amazing? He's helping me plan the surprise for her." I smiled, but something inside me cracked so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I wanted to scream the truth, to warn him, to shatter the illusion before it devoured him. But I couldn't. He looked so happy, and happiness had always been rare in this house. Mark and I had grown apart quietly over the years, more like polite roommates than lovers, and Daniel had filled that emptiness with his laughter. I couldn't bear to take that away from him. Not yet. Instead, I busied myself with small things. I ironed the linens for the ceremony, pressed the lace on Lily's gown, arranged flowers, baked cookies for the neighbors. People said I was glowing with pride. They didn't see the truth behind my smile. One afternoon, while Lily was trying on her dress, she stood before the mirror and said softly, "You've been like a second mother to me. I'll never forget what you've done." Her eyes shimmered with tears, and for a fleeting second, I believed her. Then I remembered that day in her apartment, the whisper in her voice when she said, "After the wedding." The memory struck me like cold wind. I turned away before she could see the tears forming in my own eyes. A week later, the wedding invitations arrived. Daniel handed me one, proud and nervous. "Looks perfect, doesn't it?" he said. I nodded. The words, "Mark and Evelyn Johnson cordially invite you," stared back at me. Our names together, a lie printed in gold ink. That night, I went through old photo albums looking for something real. There were pictures of us laughing at the beach, celebrating birthdays, hugging Daniel when he graduated. For a while, I could almost pretend we were still that family. But then I remembered that every smile in those photos belonged to another time, a version of us that no longer existed. As the wedding drew closer, Mark grew restless. He left early, came home late, always with some excuse. I never asked. I already knew the answers. Once, while folding his laundry, I found a small receipt from a jewelry store, a delicate necklace with a heart-shaped pendant. It wasn't the one Daniel had chosen for Lily. I placed it back where I found it, my hands trembling. Days passed, then weeks. I felt like I was standing on a bridge watching a storm roll in, powerless to stop it. Each night, I rehearsed conversations in my mind, how I might tell Daniel, how I might confront Mark, but every version ended the same way: tears, destruction, an empty house. So I stayed silent. The morning of Daniel's bachelor party, Mark was usually cheerful. He joked, laughed, even danced with me in the kitchen for a moment like old times. For a heartbeat, I almost forgot everything. Then his phone buzzed, and when he saw the name flash on the screen, his smile faded. He turned away to answer, his voice low. He didn't know I was watching. He didn't know I had already stopped believing in anything he said. That night, after everyone went to bed, I took a walk outside. The moon was high, the street quiet. I ended up near Lily's apartment again. The lights were off, the curtains drawn. I stood there for a long time, staring up at her window. I didn't want to see anything. I just wanted to understand why. When I came home, I found Daniel sitting on the porch. He smiled at me, his eyes soft with affection. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. I shook my head. He sighed. "I keep thinking how lucky I am, Mom. I don't know what I did to deserve her." I bit my lip so hard it almost bled. He looked so certain, so pure in his love, that I couldn't destroy it. Not yet. Instead, I reached out and touched his cheek. "You deserve the best, Daniel. Always remember that." He laughed gently. "You sound emotional tonight." "I suppose I am," I whispered. When he went inside, I stayed a little longer, staring at the stars. The night air was cold against my skin. Somewhere deep inside, I knew the secret couldn't stay buried forever. Truth has a way of finding light, no matter how tightly we try to hold it in the dark. But I wasn't ready. Not tonight. For now, I would keep carrying it alone. This fragile, heavy truth that was slowly breaking me from the inside out. The morning of the wedding came wrapped in sunlight, as if the sky itself wanted to pretend everything was fine. Birds sang outside my window. Children laughed somewhere down the street, and the scent of roses from the bouquet arrangements filled the air. From the outside, it was a perfect day. But inside me, the world was trembling. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mark and Lily together, whispering promises they had no right to share. Yet here I was, fastening my necklace, smoothing down my dress, forcing a smile for the day that was supposed to be one of the happiest of our lives. I told myself again and again, this day is for Daniel, not for Mark, not for Lily, for my son. He deserved a moment of peace before the storm that was bound to come. When I walked into the kitchen, Mark was already there, dressed sharply in his gray suit. He turned when he saw me and smiled. "You look beautiful," he said softly. I nodded, unable to find words. The way he looked at me, polite, careful, it was as if nothing between us had ever happened. Perhaps in his mind, nothing had. Perhaps denial was easier for him than guilt. Daniel came in next, radiant in his tuxedo. His face glowed with that kind of joy that makes you both proud and afraid at once. He hugged me tightly. "Mom, can you believe today's the day?" I smiled and tried to keep my voice from shaking. "You'll make a wonderful husband, sweetheart." He laughed, nervous and hopeful. And for that brief moment, I forgot everything.
He was still my little boy, the same one who used to bring me wildflowers from the yard. The ceremony was held in a small garden behind the chapel. White chairs lined the aisle, music floated gently from the speakers, and everyone looked so happy. I stood at the front, near the altar, watching guests arrive. Lily appeared a few minutes later, glowing in her gown. She looked stunning, too stunning, almost unreal. When her eyes met mine, something flickered there. Guilt, maybe, fear. And she quickly looked away. Mark stood beside Daniel as best man. It should have been a proud sight, father and son together, but all I could see was the invisible thread between them, stretching across the aisle like a ghost only I could sense. The ceremony began. The vows, the laughter, the soft music. I watched Lily repeat the words of love and loyalty, her voice steady. Mark's expression never wavered. And I stood there, clapping, smiling, pretending. Every smile felt like glass cracking inside me. When they kissed, the guests cheered. I clapped too, but quietly. My hands felt numb. All I could think was how fragile truth is, how it hides beneath layers of beauty and tradition, waiting for one careless moment to be exposed. The reception followed at a nearby hall. The room was filled with lights, music, and laughter. Everyone danced, toasted, took pictures. Daniel looked at Lily like she was his whole world, and she played the part perfectly. I tried to focus on him, to freeze the image of his happiness before it all disappeared. Midway through the evening, I stepped outside to get some air. The noise was too much. The laughter, the music, the pretending. Outside, the night was quiet. The stars seemed too calm for what I felt inside. That's when I heard voices, faint but familiar, coming from behind the garden hedge. It was Mark and Lily. Their tones were hushed but urgent. I didn't want to listen, but their words pulled me in like a tide I couldn't resist. "After tonight, everything changes," Lily whispered. Mark sighed. "We'll have to be careful. He doesn't suspect anything." Lily's voice trembled. "I can't live like this forever. It's killing me." Mark reached for her hand. "Just a little longer. I'll handle it." I stepped back, my breath caught in my throat. Even after saying their vows, even after binding herself to my son, she was still clinging to my husband. The ache that rose in my chest was like fire, not anger, just deep, bone-deep sorrow. I turned quietly and walked away before they could see me. Inside, Daniel was laughing with friends, his eyes glowing with love and pride. He noticed me and waved. "Mom, there you are. You okay?" I forced another smile. "Just fine, sweetheart. It's a beautiful night." He nodded, his face soft and open. "It really is." That night, when the party ended and the guests began to leave, I stood at the edge of the dance floor watching my son and his new wife say their goodbyes. Mark was busy thanking everyone, laughing as though his heart were clear of any burden. I wondered how two people could lie so easily while standing in the middle of everything they were about to destroy. Back home, the silence was unbearable. Mark came in later, humming softly. He poured himself a drink, loosened his tie, and asked, "Everything went well, don't you think?" I nodded. Yes, everything went perfectly. He smiled faintly, unaware that every word he spoke cut deeper into the truth I was holding inside. When he went to bed, I stayed up, sitting by the window. I could see the faint glow of Daniel's house down the street, where he and Lily had moved after the wedding. It should have comforted me, but it didn't. It only reminded me that the lie was now part of his home, too. For days afterwards, I lived between moments of silence and small talk. Daniel and Lily visited often, bringing leftover wedding cake, sharing photos. Mark joined their laughter easily, as if nothing weighed on him. I, meanwhile, felt myself shrinking, turning into a shadow in my own home. One afternoon, Lily came alone. She looked tired, her smile too tight. She handed me a small box. "Daniel wanted me to drop this off," she said. Her voice trembled slightly. When our eyes met, I saw something there. Not guilt this time, but fear. She hesitated, then added, You haven't said anything, have you?" For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Her words were like a cold wind through the room. I set the box down carefully. "No," I said quietly, "I haven't." She exhaled shakily. "Thank you. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, I swear." I studied her face. She was so young, so lost in the mess she had created. "I believed you were good for him," I said softly. "I treated you like my own." Tears filled her eyes. "I know, and that's what makes this so hard." There was a long silence between us. Finally, she whispered, "I'll end it. I have to." I nodded, but I didn't believe her. Some truths once awakened don't sleep again so easily. When she left, I sat there for a long time staring at the box she'd brought. Inside were family photos Daniel wanted framed for the house. In one of them, the four of us were smiling. Me, Mark, Daniel, and Lily, all frozen in a lie that was already starting to crack. As the days went on, the tension in the air thickened, invisible but heavy. Mark grew distant. Lily stopped visiting as often. And Daniel? He began to notice. Small things, small silences. He'd ask me, "Mom, is everything okay? You've been quiet lately." I'd smile and say, "Just tired, sweetheart, that's all." But my eyes must have said more than I meant them to, because one evening he looked at me differently, searching, cautious. He said, "Mom, if there's something I should know, will you tell me?" I froze. The question hung in the air between us, fragile and heavy. My throat tightened. The truth was right there, pressing against my lips, but my heart wasn't ready to speak it. Daniel's question stayed with me long after he went home that night. "If there's something I should know, will you tell me?" Those words echoed in my mind like the ticking of a clock, steady and unrelenting. I knew I couldn't hold the truth forever. Secrets rot when you try to bury them. They find their own way to breathe. For days, I avoided his calls. I told myself I needed time, that I had to find the right moment, the gentlest way. But the truth never waits for our convenience. It was a quiet Sunday morning when everything began to unravel. Daniel and Lily were coming over for lunch. I spent the early hours cooking his favorite stew, the one my mother had taught me. The smell of onions and herbs filled the house. It should have been comforting. Instead, it made me feel sick. Mark helped set the table, humming a tune under his breath. I watched his hands move around the plates and wondered how he could be so calm, so normal. He caught me staring and smiled. "You okay?" I forced a nod. "Just thinking." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "About what?" "About what honesty means," I said softly. He froze for a second, the color draining slightly from his face, then gave a nervous laugh. "You always think too much," he said, walking away.
I turned back to the pot on the stove, blinking back tears. When Daniel and Lily arrived, the air in the room changed. It felt heavier, as if everyone sensed something they couldn't name. Lily looked pale. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Daniel, as always, was warm and eager, trying to bridge whatever distance he felt between us. We sat down to eat. The clinking of spoons and soft chatter filled the silence that none of us wanted to face. Halfway through the meal, Daniel reached for Lily's hand, but she pulled away slightly, pretending to fix her napkin. He looked confused. "You okay, babe?" She nodded too quickly. "Just tired." Mark coughed and changed the subject, asking Daniel about work. I watched the exchange like an outsider, my appetite gone. The world inside that small dining room felt fragile, like glass ready to crack at the slightest touch. After lunch, Daniel went outside to make a quick call. The moment he stepped out, Lily turned to me. Her face was pale, trembling. "Mrs. Johnson, I can't keep lying to him." Mark stiffened. "Lily," he warned quietly. "No, I can't do this anymore. He deserves the truth." My heart thudded. This was it, the moment I had dreaded, arriving not by my choice, but by hers. I whispered, "Lily, please, not like this, not while he's—" The front door opened before I could finish. Daniel stood there, phone still in his hand, looking between us. His smile faded. "Not while I'm—" What? Silence. Lily's hands began to shake. "Daniel, Mark tried to interrupt. "Son, this isn't the time." But Daniel's eyes were fixed on Lily. "What's going on?" No one spoke. Only the faint sound of wind from the open door filled the space. Finally, Lily whispered, "I'm sorry." Daniel frowned. "For what?" She glanced at Mark, then back at Daniel. Her lips trembled. "There's something you need to know." My chest tightened. I wanted to stop her, to protect him from the blow, but I knew it was too late. Truth had already stepped into the room. Daniel's face changed slowly as realization began to form. His eyes darted from her to Mark, then to me. "Mom?" he asked quietly. "What's happening?" I opened my mouth, but no words came. Tears spilled down my cheeks before I could answer. And that was all the answer he needed. He turned to Mark, his voice shaking. "Tell me this isn't real." Mark looked away. "Daniel, please, tell me." The sound of my son's voice broke something deep inside me. It wasn't anger. It was disbelief, heartbreak, and the sound of innocence shattering all at once. Lily began to sob. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." Daniel stared at her as if seeing a stranger. "How long?" When she didn't answer, he turned to Mark again. "How long, Dad?" Mark's shoulders sagged. "A few months," he said quietly. It was a mistake. Daniel stepped back as if he'd been struck. "A mistake? You were supposed to be my father." I reached for him. "Daniel," he pulled away, shaking his head. "You knew." The words hit like a knife. I couldn't deny it. My silence had betrayed him as much as their actions had. "I wanted to protect you," I whispered. "Protect me?" he said bitterly. "By letting me marry her? By letting me look up to him?" His voice cracked. "You all lied." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Lily sat sobbing quietly. Mark stood frozen, ashamed. I wanted to reach him, to tell him I never stopped loving him, but words were useless now. Daniel finally said, his voice low and hoarse, "I can't stay here."
He walked out the door, leaving silence behind him. I ran to the window and watched as he drove away, his car disappearing down the street. The sound of the engine faded, but the ache in my chest did not. For a long time, none of us spoke. Lily sat at the table, her hands covering her face. Mark sank into a chair, looking 20 years older. I stood in the doorway, holding on to the frame to keep from collapsing. When I finally found my voice, it was little more than a whisper. I hope it was worth it. Mark looked up, eyes red. "Evelyn, please." "No," I said softly. "No more lies. The truth has done enough damage." I left the room and went to the garden. The air outside was cool, the sky dimming to gray. Somewhere far away, thunder rolled, low and distant. I sat on the bench under the old oak tree and closed my eyes. For years, I had imagined growing old surrounded by family, birthdays, grandchildren, laughter. Now, everything felt uncertain. I didn't know if Daniel would forgive me or if Mark and I could ever share the same roof again. But even through the ache, there was something else. A strange stillness, a faint sense of relief. The truth was finally out. The pretending was over. And though the pieces of our family lay scattered, at least the lies no longer held them together. As the first drops of rain began to fall, I whispered into the empty garden. Maybe now we can start to heal, even if healing means walking separate paths.
It's been almost 3 years since that day. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago, and sometimes it feels like yesterday. The sound of Daniel's voice breaking, the look in Mark's eyes, the way the house fell silent after the door slammed. There are days I still wake up expecting to hear them laughing in the kitchen before remembering that laughter doesn't live here anymore. After that afternoon, everything moved in slow motion. Daniel didn't come home for months. He stayed with a friend in another town, refusing to take my calls. I wrote him letters, not to justify what happened, but to tell him that no matter how broken we were, I still loved him. Most of them came back unopened. Mark and I tried to live under the same roof for a while, but it was like sharing space with a ghost. He slept in the guest room, spoke only when necessary, and spent long hours sitting on the porch, staring at nothing. One night, he came to me quietly and said, "I think I should go." I didn't argue. We both knew it was time. When he packed his bags, I didn't cry. There were no more tears left to shed. He hugged me before leaving, a soft, broken hug that said more than words could. "I'm sorry, Evelyn," he whispered. "I know, but sorry doesn't fix what's gone." And just like that, he was gone too. For a long time after, the house felt like a museum of what used to be, rooms filled with echoes and memories. I couldn't bring myself to cook Daniel's favorite stew or wash the mug Mark always used. Even the clock on the wall seemed to tick louder in the emptiness. But silence has a strange way of teaching you things. When there's no one left to talk to, you start to listen. To the wind, to the birds, to your own thoughts. I began spending hours in the garden. At first, it was just to keep busy. Then slowly, it became my therapy. Planting, watering, trimming, every act felt like a small promise that life could still grow from something broken. The seasons passed, one after another. Autumn scattered golden leaves across the lawn. Winter came and painted the windows with frost. Spring returned with the first bloom of lilies, bright and defiant against the gray soil. And with each change, I felt something inside me soften. One morning, as I was pruning the roses, I saw a car pull up by the front gate. It was Daniel. He stood there for a long time before walking toward me. My heart raced, but I stayed still, afraid that if I moved, the moment would vanish. He looked older, more tired, but there was kindness in his eyes again. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. That simple word, Mom, nearly undid me. I smiled through tears. "Hi, sweetheart." For a while, we just stood there, not speaking. Then he said, "I've been angry for so long. I thought hating everyone would make it easier, but it didn't." I nodded. Hate only burns the person who holds it. He sighed. "I don't think I can ever forget, but maybe I can forgive." "That's enough," I whispered. We didn't talk about Mark or Lily that day. We didn't need to. Some wounds don't need to be reopened to heal. He stayed for lunch, soup and bread, simple and quiet. And when he left, he hugged me tightly. It wasn't a reunion. It was something gentler, a small bridge being built after a long storm. After that visit, he started calling every few weeks. Sometimes we talked about work, sometimes the weather. We avoided the past. Maybe one day we'll be able to speak of it freely, but for now, just hearing his voice is enough. As for Mark, he lives in another state. We exchange polite messages during holidays. I don't hate him anymore. I did for a while, not because of what he did, but because of how much I once loved him. Now, I just wish him peace. People make terrible choices when they lose themselves, and I've learned that punishment doesn't rebuild anything. Only acceptance can. Sometimes late at night, I sit by the window and think of how differently things could have been. If I had spoken sooner, if I had confronted the truth instead of trying to hide it. But then I remind myself, life doesn't give do-overs, only lessons. The biggest one? That silence can be just as destructive as betrayal. By keeping quiet, I thought I was protecting my family. In reality, I was building walls between us. Now, when I look back, I don't see a story of failure anymore. I see a story of survival, of a woman who loved, who lost, and who learned to live again. The house isn't as quiet these days. My niece visits sometimes with her little girl, and the sound of laughter fills the rooms again. I've started volunteering at the local shelter, too, cooking meals for people who've lost their homes or their hope. Every time someone smiles and says thank you, it reminds me that I still have something to give. Last spring, I planted a new tree in the garden, an oak sapling, right beside the old one where I used to sit and cry. It's small now, but it grows a little stronger each day. Whenever I water it, I whisper, "You're allowed to start over." Maybe I'm saying it to the tree. Maybe I'm saying it to myself. Life has a way of moving on, even when you think it shouldn't. Some days still hurt, but pain doesn't last forever. Only the lessons do. So if you're listening to my story and wondering how I made it through, this is what I want you to know. Healing doesn't mean everything becomes perfect again. Sometimes healing means learning to live with the cracks and still finding beauty in the way the light comes through them. I still miss my family, the way we used to be. But I've learned to stop chasing the past and start tending to what remains. And that, I think, is enough. Because in the end, love, even broken love, still teaches us how to grow. And I've learned that growth not perfection, is the real kind of happy ending.